development, all these gardens could be linked up quite easily, as long as this massive roadway, which was once a great 19th century engineering feat, and this massive roadway would be put underground, and a new linear park would be facing basically primarily south along the Thames, from Blackfriars to the Tate Gallery down here. And this was the study on two axes, and the series of causeways would help link across here, where there'd be islands in the water. We call it Museum of Tomorrow, cafe, restaurants, leisure activities, and so on, which would be a development in this area, actually on the water. Now, this was part of an attempt to, at the broad terms of urban study. Next slides. Next slide, please. And just continuing that for a moment, our entry to the Paternoster approach, it was never meant to be a scheme, it was purely an approach towards the St. Paul's area. And what we were interested in doing was to create a dense matrix, in the sense of buildings, to close up this rather like it used to be more in the 18th, 17th, and 16th century medieval times, rather than the 20th century, where you have buildings in space as you have now here. There's St. Paul's, buildings standing in space here, rather than space standing in a building. And it is this sort of, in the sense the architect's role is obviously to handle both, but it's not one right or one wrong. The heroic sort of Renaissance and Greek view of buildings standing alone in space is one of the ways of designing ideal towns, and also of infilling old towns, and has always been so. And the possibility of creating a matrix of buildings and carving space out is also part of the history of architecture. And we were examining that type of potential within this scheme here. We weren't allowed to go further forward. There were very strict building lines. That building had to be kept here, etc. But what we tried to create is a sort of a new space in the center here, which was going to be a large people's place as against a large God's place in the center here, should we say. And that actually linked down to the tube station, which you'll see in a moment, small courtyard and so on, within that great arcade all the way along the outside. Next. And so you've got here St. Paul's, this great sort of arcade leading you straight into this piazza. This piazza slowly sank down to give you the maximum number of public activities in this. Can you focus this a bit? Look, thank you. That's it. So here, all this area, all the area from one floor above ground and downward would be public activities. These would be basically offices and commercial space above, apart from the roof, which again would be sports and leisure activities, also because you had such a wonderful view of the dome at this level. And we've tried to create a modern piazza behind glass on this side here. So this became a glass screen here, and then the buildings rounded. And then when you came in by tube station, you'd get a glimpse of St. Paul's up there, which would be through that axis there onto that way. So that really was the sort of the basis of the scheme, and as I said, it was very much a matrix rather than architecture as such. We sort of kept down to the sort of levels which we thought were acceptable, and which were also basically regulations which are around this height of the dome. And we more or less met the number of square feet of offices, which I don't might be too much, but only marginally as far as I'm concerned, as long as you optimize the amount of public space available in this area here, which is where the people wanted anyhow, and obviously the roofs. Next. Further sort of sketches of that, the idea of the sort of ceremonial walk from the Ludgate Circus down here into this piazza, down into the tube station, or terraces, sort of, and so on. The view of St. Paul's, as well see there, through this piazza, and the buildings around. This is just a massing model. It's not really a piece of architecture. A massing model showing the form primarily by things like desire lines coming up from Ludgate into this glazed atrium down to the space, and these cuts which start to say spaces in buildings rather than buildings in space. Next. Centre Pompidou, most of you have seen this by now, or illustrated. Competition we won in 1971 with Renzo Piano. And this was the original facade for the competition, the attempt not to create a monument again in space, but rather create a communication system throughout France and the rest of the world, communicating on an audiovisual system on the outside of the building, a great big open framework with movement on the outside, streets in the air, the Smithson, Peter Cook, Cedric Price, all these things. But this is very much a building out of the 60s, and the attempt, as we've on the sort of framework which we've worked ever since the, I suppose, early 60s, in which activities are held in on the basis of activities change much more quickly than the buildings they're in. Obviously, here's a typical building where the activity has changed from the original idea of a house. The square itself, cleared in the 1930s. Car park used to be the brothel area of Paris. Removal of buildings because they didn't like prostitutions. Prostitutes moved one road further back. Social advance. This area has now, which was basically, as you can see from here, a slum, has now become very much sought after area. The Marais, it's like extremely beautiful, especially from here to the Place de Vosges on the other side. I think I've got this left or right, doesn't matter. As I said, this whole area has changed in a sense partly because of this building, because the left bank has become, the right bank has become very much more like the left bank now. There are many more students, much more life, and this is, the main success of the place, I suppose, is the outside, the square, which is full of people. Next. Now, this building was much more open in the original competition. We had to close it down because everybody got scared of the height of the building, underlying one of the basic problems, which I'm always sort of trying to talk about, which is that size has got nothing to do with the actual scale and grain of a building. And by compressing it more, which we have here in a section through the building, so as to meet the sort of planning rules and regulations, we actually created more dense. There's less play of light and shadow, less space scooped out, and therefore actually I think the building is actually more solid than it would have been. Having said that, the principles are still here. 50-meter spans between steel columns, great big floors, size of 2 football fields, people movement on one side, a continuation of people movement of the piazza, people moving all the way across here. Originally, also, and the public realm also very much on this side here. Restaurants, cinemas on the top to draw the people to the top, a bit like, I suppose, Paternoster in that sense. And then the activities in the floors in between. Library, museums, etc. Museum came in very late, and I suspect already there was already discussion about a major reorganization of the centre as activities develop. Some activities work less well, should be removed, but the building is likely to stay there for a while, hopefully. And what is really the key thing to the flexible space, and these are flexible spaces, obviously, is that you need people to change them as one learns about them, as things develop. You actually need to drive a building which gives flexibility. The theory behind flexibility, obviously, is that you don't corset, you don't limit the activities of the user, that the user himself is expressed by the building, can be expressed by the building. The people walking is the main part of the building. The services, the structure, all is legible, and that it's a sort of a piece of cityscape and a piece of indeterminate layered building. The layering allows for certain forgiveness in the sense of the changeability of things behind the layering. I'll talk about that in a moment. A diagram I often use, which basically says city infrastructure, hundreds and thousands of years, i.e. roads, are calculated in hundreds of years. Buildings, maybe 100 years. London, about 75-year average life. It's these things which demolish buildings and give you short life, which basically is appliances and mechanical systems. And let's say a lift is like a car. It needs to be changed every few years if you're going to keep up, with the Joneses and go faster and smoother. And so those things need to be removed, or the building has to be taken down. And if you can get at those elements, then that's all much the better. So some of our buildings have the services on the outside or underneath or on the roof, but specifically in servant areas, whether on top, on the side of it, or where you can actually get at them. And they also have a certain value because of the accessibility, they seem to be visible, or they tend to be visible. They cost a lot, probably a third of the volume of the building is servicing, all down here. And so they are given a certain weight in our architectural language, and I state our architectural language, there are many ways of doing architecture, a certain weight, as in a sense one structure is also given a certain weight in the design process. Next. Elevation or facade of Centre Pompidou, the meeting places, and of course perhaps the most successful thing, something which we certainly only partly realized when we were designing Centre Pompidou, and that is how Paris is people's place, and people come to see people. And so once you've got some success, then more people come to watch more people, and more people start to use the escalators, and hopefully more people will go into the departments and so on. And the whole idea of movement as, again, as something to enjoy, not to sort of rub shoulders in a dark dark hole in a lift or a staircase in the interior or corridors, but rather something which gives you views across Paris. And the structure and the legibility, again, the structure, the way it works, compression, tension, nodes, beams, trusses, etc., cleaning gear, and so on. So that all is part of the sort of celebration of this building. Next. And the other side of the building, on the roadside, here it's hard, it's again soft, the other side is soft, shall we say, because it's all people. Here it's all cars going, at the end here is Notre Dame. So this is part of the street facade and multicolored in relation to the different uses of the ducts and so on. People often come up to me and say, I'm sure you don't need all those pipes. Actually, of course, if this is actually a very low-cost building and not very well serviced, if it was a truly modern, well-serviced building, we would need more rather than less, probably. And of course, they're changing it already again here within that framework. Next. This question of changeability, which we've all searched for since Norman Foster and I, in the days of Team 4, designed this Reliance Control with Wendy Foster and Sue Rogers. And in a sense, I suppose most of our work harks back very much towards this, through this building, where for a very low cost in those days, £3 something per square foot, 1965, we sort of created a sort of simple shed and semi-museum. It's non-museum in the sense that it doesn't look for ideal proportions. It doesn't look to, shall we say, contain or corset some of the secondary and tertiary elements as a museum building does. But it does use or give a value to the structure. And I say tension and compression are usually legible. Practically after, just as we completed, the owner at that time, Peter Parker, left. The new guy came along, got his tin opener, canner open, and opened up the side. And I've never been back to see it again. It's too painful. And since then I've been searching for a way in which we can do buildings where you can get your tin shed aesthetic and open it up without having this sort of situation. In other words, a layered building, a building where light and shadow plays within it in such a way that it doesn't really matter whether you're solid or transparent or translucent or red or blue and so on. The overall beat, the improvisation system within the beat, I'm relating it to poetry or jazz if you like, you can improvise within a certain framework, and that improvisation gives a certain freedom to the user, and it's a search for that which I suppose gives us the aesthetic, if you like, which of the buildings that we are working on. And of course, again, back to the question of transparency and translucence and so on, light coming through courtyards, etc., like that, the escalators, etc. And there's this new area, this sort of new gentrification with its own problems, of course, from the slums that you saw earlier over here. Next. A quick comparison between a sort of Norman Foster's wonderful building in Ipswich, which depends upon its control, brilliant control, by being so perfect that no one dares actually touch the facade. If you have a broken window, you have to change it because actually, you know, it's unacceptable. And it obviously stands absolutely in space and looks totally finite. Here instead we're looking for aesthetic which is indeterminate, where it looks as though, and where it can in fact grow, where pieces can be changed, where meeting rooms can be added, added after the building is more than halfway up. A whole series of new meeting rooms were added to there. Whole series of new air conditioning requirements due to the microcommunication revolution which happened in the late 70s had to be taken up, and things grew larger and the building changed quite a lot during design. And that is in a sense part of the nature of this type of building, these external lifts, and it's sort of, in this one sense, unfinished and therefore probably more crude look about it. Crude because in a sense it gives you a feeling of not, there is not that classical feeling of ends and center and middle. which is the classical, so in the middle and the two ends. And in that sense, again, close approach to the Gothic feeling of growth and change and determinant. Next. The glorification of structure, the fact that technology has, throughout history, produced massive changes, and of course, massive changes socially has produced technology. The two are linked. You can't, it's chicken and egg. You can't separate the two. You can't, and the flying buttress which props up this church, which in itself is a statement about a fearful society, medieval society, stretching up towards God. And the gargoyles glorifying water, etc., just in the same way as pipes glorify air conditioning or water as in any other building. And the same type of sort of celebration of the structure, Centre Pompidou, the great 10-ton Gerberets castings. Peter Rice was the engineer on this with the Arabs. The cables and the relationship between the pieces of different scale. Next. And a form of harmony by contrast. Sorry, I'm just remembering it like that. The Gerberets being made, the point here, I suppose, is again the need for the architect. I think it's very difficult at school, I find it impossible, to appreciate the fact that if you don't control the process of manufacture, if you don't know how machinery works, then the machinery will never actually work, and then you'll never get the pieces you think you're drawing, and vice versa. In other words, the link between the arm, the brain, the tool, and the end product. And if we don't go on giving up the control of technology to industry, if we go on doing it that way, then all we'll end up doing is making less or more beautiful packaged exteriors. In other words, we become decorative artists, shall we say, on the outside of predetermined buildings designed by the builder and by industry. And so I feel very strong of the need for the understanding of what happens whether it's in Krupp or whether it's the microcommunication world, so that we do have a control of the process of manufacture. The enjoyment that we as a practice get from things, this is the column, this is upside down for the slide, but this is the column, water filled for fire reasons, the great Gerberets, the collars, the building moves, but there's no movement joints within it, so the movement is taken up at each collar here. It also relates to the way the piece is dropped on, so a massive number of studies will be made. How do you drop the piece on? Click. It's click into place because it's all dry jointed, so it has to have these sort of, well, it has to have some of those basic, that type of shape. Next. But it's not, I mean, it's a mistake again to think that there is, in my opinion, a difference between craftsmanship, and I very much believe that craftsmanship exists, and engineering and architecture. They are all linked, have always been linked. We can just build it faster now than we used to be able to do it before, higher, etc. Views of the people gathering, people watching views, and so on. The escalators, the enjoyment of movement, the enjoyment of stairs. Next. We were asked to put a building here for the Music Research Centre. This building was demolished just off the side of Centre Pompidou, and there was this very beautiful church here. So rather than putting a building here, we put the building underground because it was a Music Research Centre, so we could do that. And this became a sort of a secondary piazza, which now has this rather beautiful fountain with sculptures on it, as an addition to the sort of the views, both to the building, from the building, and for the people to enjoy themselves. Next, Nicky Sanfao, the sculptor. This question of different forms of building in harmony. There is this myth that buildings in harmony have to look like each other. They never have, but there is still certain harmonies, and if there is a harmony, it's probably harmony due to the quality of the building, due to the recognition of harmony by contrast. The view across the backs of Cambridge, the great church, King's College, the Gibbs building in Georgian, Gothic, Jacobean, and we all crowd along and look at it across the daffodils in spring and say that's harmonious, or if you like the same sort of exercise across Venice, where we have absolutely everything here, from classical library here to Byzantine cool, to Byzantine zany and mad at the back of San Marco, to brick with green pitch roof, every color, every material, And still it creates around the space, which is beautifully organized. It's a marker space which opens up onto the water, so the plan holds good as the backs hold good here. So here you have a scale relationship which is stunning between these buildings and an individual. And here again, the same type of thing. The water creates an outside piazza, the smaller piazza, and then the bigger piazza of St. Marco inside. So there is a harmony of spaces, but not a harmony of styles. Each style relates to the period in which it was built in. Of course, one has a certain choice, certain buildings could be impossibly tall or impossibly low. You can't create a harmony out of anything. You have got to try and decide how you're doing it and what is the harmony you're trying to achieve. Next. In Moss, our first sort of microchip building in Cardiff, where the predominant problem was the clean spaces. The clean spaces couldn't have any of the equipment underground because of vibration, had to go on in the roof. Once it was in the roof, it was logical to create a structure to hold it. Now the main problem we've done is that this structure was too small, and the pieces which are up here are actually on the ground and everywhere else, because though here we had left it a third open, technology in development is such that we never left really enough space for the amount of plant that is needed up here. The attempt again to avoid the reliance control syndrome, you can knock the panels out and you have glass or translucent or transparent. And once you have the structure in the center, you might as well create big floors, because microchip manufacturers are changing at a great rate, and you don't want columns to interrupt the activities they're in. So it's column free. The possibility of having tension cables holding that, exposing this area, which after all people have got to get to all the time. People are climbing over this the whole time to keep it to keep it organized. The machines which feed these spaces here, the main sort of corridor public way underneath it, and the sort of hierarchy inside is sort of different shape of building to the usual building of this type, which tends to be a pitched roof. I suppose California type building in the States mainly, like that. Next. So one of the points again one's making is that by looking at the organization, by questioning the organization, so new forms can come out. And of course, new forms also lead to a new organization. And again, a typical new form is, let's say, you don't need a column here, but you do need something to hold down the end of that beam, that truss. And therefore, you can invent, if you like, a new form of column. And the importance of being able to develop the details and some form of to give it some form of order. And that's what we're doing, is giving order, whether it's in urban terms to space, or whether it's order to small details, so they become more legible, so that the viewer can understand, or try to understand, if he wishes to understand, how it's put together. Next. Nighttime shots of it. And again, the sort of, instead of just a mass of pipes, are trying to give it some form of legibility, some form of rhythm. There's the rhythm, but it doesn't matter terribly what you do in between it. Improvisation, the main street between a clean area, and in the center of the building, going down there. Next. Someone just pointed out to me that there's a sort of link between somehow the enjoyment of Paolo Uccello's famous horses and arms and some of these buildings. So I thought I'd find out if it was a French person, if there was. But basically what it's really saying is a celebration again of the skyline, a celebration of, this is Princeton laboratories, of structure and of activities which they house within it. Next. The use of translucence. I've always been extremely interested in this question of translucent. Neither black panel nor white eye visual glass. I say white glass, taking into account, especially if you think of Norman Foster's building, the glass is actually black, like marble, for most of its time, except when it's backlit. Try and find something which is softer, something which is in between the two, like the Maison de Verre, Chereau's wonderful house in Paris. So this is a sort of very low-cost wall of translucence with glass panels let into it. And again, the mechanical services system, the structural system. The Inmos building was, its chief engineer was Tony Hunt. The Princeton building was Peter Rice. Next. Competition we just won lately in Berlin. right next to not the AEG Behrens factory that most of you may know in books, but another AEG factory by Behrens slightly further out in Berlin. So there's a massive brick wall about up here, doesn't show on here, back there. And against this we've tried to create the skeletal structure of light elements holding up this roof. It's a 3-story building, in fact. So that's a glass wall, totally transparent, all glass wall with floors behind it and a lightweight structure over it. It's for making printing machines or Rotherprint. Next. Same type of building, if you like. This time, very low cost building, well, about the same sort of price as the Reliance Control building, for a shopping. That's really a shopping factory, but it's a shopping center, except it only sells directly from factory, dry goods factory to buyer. And you cross a sort of moat here and enter the top floor, descend into it. And the little you can play here is the skyline rather than the usual box, and the details that is here. And again, the difference is sort of the attempt to give some form of juxtaposition between this cheap tin stuff back here and these pieces of steel. So there is a sort of a visual interrelationship between the parts. Next, cladding and structure. A planning experiment in Florence for Fiat, who have bought or have a site which is about nominally about nearly a mile across diagonally, I suppose, a quarter of a mile across diagonally. Fiat, led by Octo-Nigerian Bruno Zebi, invited about a dozen architects, half a dozen Italian and half a dozen from all around the world, to work together without any planners. They were locked together very much like a studio in a school. We were just sort of locked in for 3 days after much grumbling, and so most of us hadn't talked to any other architect apart from our own organization for a long time. It was a very beautiful sort of chateau outside on the hills of Florence, and food was brilliant. It was a great swimming pool. We were not allowed out for about 3 days until we produced a sort of master plan, everybody working together, and I won't go basically what it all means. But what was interesting is that the aim was that we just put some very simple rules together. The town itself insisted that half the ground would be open ground, which is that sort of white space in the middle here. And then we all agreed that each of us would build the building which we understood best. We had a program, our own program basically was for a bank, office building and shopping, and this is basically shopping with a bank over the top, and I'll come to that in a moment. Ours is somewhere down here, if I remember rightly. Down here, actually. And sort of gateway building from the outside, so it would be a gateway building through here, through this area here, into a massive park here. And the basic rule was do your own building, but each building should touch or overlap with the next door neighbor's building. There should be no gaps, no building standing in space. The buildings should enclose this space. It was an interesting exercise. We did it about 3 times, and for 3 days each time. And by the end of it, we did have some sort of idea where we were going. Next. And that's our own attempt at, that's the building, this gateway building, going on into the green area in the center. It's about a mile outside of the center of Paris, in between, should we say, the edge of Paris, center of Florence, in between the edge of Florence and the suburban edge and the dense edge. And this is the basic building form, which is a great shopping center here, and in sort of sketches and so on, there's an interrelation between this building and these sketches here, which give you some idea of what we're looking for. Next. And further models and so on, studies of that type of building, that form of building, basically, which would hit in the situation where you had offices, hotel, or shopping within one form of structure. Next. See, it's coming here, right. I'm intrigued how I got that in here. All right. In which case you might get this right. This is the Seine Bridge, which I thought I was showing at the end, but obviously I must have inserted it before. This is a bridge between Gare d'Orsay and Gare de Lyon, and this is Gare d'Orsay here. Gare de Lyon is back here. This is a cable structure over here. but it's actually a cable structure in the round. In other words, there is a great arch here, a sort of gateway arch. The building is made of 3 parts, great gateway arch, a platform, and a cable network which holds it. So you're entering through this cable network, and it is 40 meters high, as you can see by those very tall buildings near the Gare de Lyon. It's nearly as high, not quite as high as those buildings there. And of course, there's a great tradition in France, and both those stations show it, of steel work through the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. And of course, the Eiffel Tower is a classic. Next. There's a section through it, the great archway, the cableway, cable to the network here, holding the concrete road here, and these are the footpaths. The footpaths actually, and one of these could be turned into for a small cable train, can go up, are free to go up lower or higher. So this element here we show sometimes up here, depending on the section, sometimes down here, and gives you a roof plan, something like this. The concrete panel system underneath the bridge, which gives you a sort of a vision, a view of it from those passing underneath the bridge. And again, the idea of the bridge was that a bridge should be more than a bridge in the sense of what you see. I obviously see it diagonally, it should be changing as you approach it, it's a gateway, but also you should be able to hear it. There's that wonderful thing when you cross one of those wonderful cable bridges, whether it's in the States or in London, where you actually hear the zip as the cars go by, and there's a sort of feeling of sound, so you should be able to feel it, you should be able to hear it, as well as obviously see it. It's something to do with all the senses. Next. Some buildings we're designing in Japan, small buildings. This is actually a sort of series of shops. It's a small corner site here. All the sites in Japan are in general sort of handkerchief size. The cost of them is sort of unbelievable. And there is a simple framework, again over here, simple span across, servicing on one side, access on the other. Lots of problems with earthquakes, lots of diagonal bracing to keep the building up. And that's basically what we're allowed as far as amount of space and interrelationship with the nearby buildings, something of this sort. That is due to start construction at the beginning of next year. Next. Another building in Japan, both in Tokyo. This is right in the center of Tokyo. The other one was in the outskirts of Tokyo. A small office building on a slight hill. And there's the office building, the lifts behind those glass tubes. Here the lifts, the glass tubes, the sort of servant tower here, if you like, the jagged site with its sort of column structure to fit into the small site over there. Next. Further views. It's really only got one face, this building. In Japan, Tokyo is so crowded with buildings, and one has to try and make what one can out of this one tiny little area. And so everything happens in this corner. We sort of try to set it back to create a tiny little court, and there is a sort of, this is the reception area. You go up steps up into the reception area, you take a lift going up here, and so different views. Cars go onto a lift down below into 4 stories of car parking below this building here, in car lifts going through that way. What would happen normally on a large building, really large building, here happens on buildings sort of about the size of a big house. Next. And finally, Lloyd, I think it's finally. The original, this will be the third, or the building we've just completed, it will be the 4th building that Lloyd's have occupied this century, which again reflects a problem of the change which society is going through, where at least once upon a time buildings might last 100 or 200 years or 500 years. Today we are having greater and greater difficulty in making buildings last. I'm strongly for not only conservation of good buildings, and we mustn't mistake there were bad old buildings as well as good old buildings, but I am certainly for buildings lasting as long as possible. And apart from anything else, they've become user-friendly over time. At first, they're so new that they're like a half pair of sort of new shoes. So one's looking for ways in which buildings will have a longer life. And here again we have this sort of hierarchy, therefore there's a separation of that. And what we suggested to Lloyd's, I'm jumping a number of, I suppose, steps. Perhaps I would say, first of all, that Lloyd's actually didn't specifically want a building. They said, we have a problem. Our last building, which was only opened 15 years before it became out of date, that's that building there, about 15 years before the shoes started to pinch. This building needs more space, and also you've got to get micro-communications beginning to come into it, and there's no way we're going to get this into this building, and the lifts are packed in the center of the building, and you can't change anything, and so on. And what can you do? Our first suggestion was to remove the old roof light here and just push the roof light further up the light well and get more galleries this way, but they couldn't do it for legal reasons. And so slowly, after many suggestions, that should sort of move to suburbia, where they'd be able to get all the room on one floor and so on and so on. But we actually proposed, it was competition, we proposed, I think, 24 different strategies, varying from lifting the roof light to sort of demolishing a good piece of London. And in a sense, I think that this whole question of strategies and possibilities is very much part of the role of architecture, and I personally enjoy it immensely. It's a sort of, it's where it starts from, and if you can look at those strategies with the client, and you have to sort of start to play backwards and forwards, sort of, then new things can start to happen. And there's no question that the beauty about, shall we say, innovation, the beauty about revolution in the sense of architecture, or specifically of innovation, is that I think it makes you question the traditional values, and therefore it forces you to be more precise. You know, so if the many people say, well, of course, innovation, what it really does is it means you use things you don't understand. But I would argue that you would argue the opposite. That if you use things which have been used again and again, you don't think about them any longer. They lose that original value, and they were once innovative in their own turn, of course. And when we look at Notre Dame or Brunelleschi or whatever it may be, I should be talking about it on Sunday on TV. Innovation is something that's been throughout all time. And so anyhow, the problem here was how could you give Lloyd's a building which should see them into the next century. And the brief really was a very simple one. A building that would see us for once at least have 50 years life instead of 15 years life, and a building which would take all the technology that was likely to be needed. Of course, we didn't know what size that building was, because Lloyd's is an underwriting, buying and selling of insurance, just like any market space, and we didn't know whether the market would grow. And Lloyd said, here's some graphs, and it shows that the building will be at this, we'll need this much floor within 15 years. And we've always underestimated it, and we said to Lloyd, well, you might be wrong anyhow, because the microchip might mean that you don't need to have a big market space. You could all do it from home. You know, we've all been through this one. And anyhow, this is the late 70s, and the British economy was appalling, and New York was opening its own market. Maybe it'll shrink, in which case you could have a building which will not only be able to grow for the amount of activity, this type of activity, but could also shrink, and then let it for something else, a university, offices, School of Architecture, whatever else you like. But after all, you know, in the end, man is sort of 5'9" or whatever it is. His height doesn't change. Floor spaces in relationship to windows are not that changeable in the sense that, you know, after a certain amount you don't see out anyhow. But what does tend to change is obviously the way that you feed those floors, back to the services. And this was the first diagram showing that underwriting could fit very easily on one floor and on two floors, and this slightly weaker yellow might be on a third floor, and this could be office space, and those are the towers which serve them, and the great atrium down the center, because everybody wanted to see each other, which is the key part of the market. Next. And that's a sort of traditional plan, if you like. You have to have the atrium. The old building, you remember, will have had an atrium, but then it has, just like here, it had all its blue being its servant activities pushed into the corners. And this gave you problems of flexibility, and certainly couldn't get at cableways and so on within it. You couldn't grow, nor could they shrink. And they need their own life, they need their own entity, they have their own existence. And in fact, in 1958, modern economics, after all, were in existence in 1958. That building had under half the space usable. We then came up with this plan, which has over 80% of the space, or about 80% of the space usable in this type of plan, where those things are on the outside. So in pure economic terms, this is already a big gain. And also, again, by using mathematics, we're actually able to put a building here which is about 50% more volume on the site than the other building around here, which the client lapped up and gave us a bit more money to spend on the finishes. Which is part of the economic question of what the architect is. He's in charge, theoretically, of construction, of design, of how materials are made, of machinery, and also of the economics with his team. And I loathe the idea of giving up any of those pieces. And so here you are, and these are basically, there you can see the lifts, the reception area of the lifts, the staircases, the yellow is electricity, toilets, pods, and so on. And because the building actually is in a medieval street pattern here, we created a very simple rectangle, like this, and the slat around the side was the space where we put the servant towers, more or less. And we created the main pivotal tower here, which you can see from the Bank of England. And we did actually do sketches of the site from Blackheath, Hammersmith, and all the other places, because we wanted to study the skyline as well as the ground line, and try to create a building which, as you approached it, would have the richness of interest, which you saw in things like Leadenhall Market, there's tremendous richness of interest here, would not be as boring as some of these buildings here, which were the buildings of the 50s and 60s, which we were all getting very tired of by then, and I have got tired of. So it had the richness of articulation, would be layered, here again from central atrium, layering of buildings, extremely interesting, we're extremely interested in this whole question, and would at the same time fit the whole site, because we felt that these small streets were really rooms without roofs. Next. Lloyd's at night with great big blue lights and stainless steel and the glass, and an attempt again to get the use of translucent glass. I'll talk more about it in a moment, so as not to get the blackness of glass or the whiteness of glass, depending with its lit, to get this halfway situation. And for me, it's one of my sort of, I suppose, favourite sort of views of Lloyd's, but also in the sense that it's interesting how different it is at night and at day, this whole change between different lights, and London in different lights. There's the more simplistic and one of the better buildings, in my opinion, the CU building, and the Lloyd's building, the great atrium, coming down in scale to the smaller buildings over here, going up in scale towards the CU building, etc. Next. Lessons about planning, G Street's law courts, the possibility of the vertical holding the edge of the street, the spaces for pedestrians to move into to get away from the traffic. I never understood what happened to the traffic when this photograph was taken. I think it must have come from the A library, many years ago. Again, the potential, the lessons that one can learn from buildings, such as this one, and the roof line, the richness of the roof line. And how the sort of horizontality of the modern buildings down here start to break up, to your eyes no longer led from piece to piece, as it is, down here. So ground line, roof line, central areas, and so on. Much to be learned, and some of this we try to interpret within our own architecture. The main Tower 1 on the corner of the principal corner with the Bank of England at the bottom of Leadenhall, and Lime Street down here, the old Lloyd's building just back here, the main entrance in here, and everything pivoting round this big state sort of anchor at the corner. Flag post. Next. The enjoyment of movement, the lifts, the detailing, the air conditioning element, the whole question of detailing from the smallest to the largest, from urban structure, macro to micro details. And so you get the situation here, the heating coming out of those little holes there, etc. The translucent material of the glass, the pipes, the layering of the pieces going back in the distance, the cleaning elements, the easy legibility of the building. Next. I think these are probably more sort of, this is concrete. Concrete is a perfectly good material. It depends how you use it. Seeing Pei use concrete, as I've just seen, let's say, in the Louvre, where he's done this pyramid. The concrete in the pyramid is probably better than the best Italian marble, which is used there as well. If you look at the two, I probably prefer the concrete. It is so unbelievably finished that he's actually managed to make something better than marble out of concrete. So the problem is the material. It's not the material, it's how you use the material. This is nowhere near as good, though we did use one of Ian Pei's advisors on how to pour this concrete. Here, for instance. The main atrium, as I said before, the legibility of the joints of the pieces and so on, and the servicing elements, how the services pass through the floors, the escalators, the enjoyment of movement on the escalator. Next. Next. One of the nodes, the attempt to also stop the the whole question is control of weathering. So by having these small areas which are flat, minute areas are flat, of course there's a greater chance that you will be able to control the weathering of these pieces than if you have massive areas of concrete. The detail in generally the expression of the floor depth and so on. The transparent and translucent, the difference of scale between this, and the total building. Next. In the same way as I suppose on Centre Pompidou, where the activities was one of the major areas of research, we actually set up a team at Centre Pompidou called the non-programmed activities. Here we set up a team looking into the research of new materials, and this is a new form of translucent glass, and also the fact that the skin itself is the duct. In other words, air conditioning, which is basically blown in here, is taken into the light fitting, which you may remember you saw, and then down through the glass. So the glass itself, the glass is actually part of the duct. This is a testing of the glass. This is the design of different types of rollers to create this glass. They attempt to create a wall of light, refraction, a reflection of light like this. So that you didn't get the blackness of glass like that, or you get a juxtaposition between that blackness and the lighter glass here, the concrete, the steel, and so on, and the elements. Next. Studies, energy studies. Red is where energy is leaking out. Lloyd's is extremely efficient on energy terms. It's practically a cube. It's the triple skin. The air conditioning goes, as I mentioned, through the glass, so you can get right up to the glass without discomfort. It also helps to mediate whether it's cold or hot, inside or outside. It saves energy in that term. You can put more boosters underneath the floors here to give a bit more heat in specific areas where you need it, or a bit more cooling in specific areas where you need it. So you boost through these areas. The light is both heating, ventilating, and security, fire, smoke detection, all that within that light system. And that's the service zone from here to there, which gives you a pretty good idea of how much what you need, and the increase of light by refraction within the room itself. Next. There's where the air conditioning actually flows, the return air flows in here, in the space here. These wonderful German windows which fit absolutely perfectly, and close on this there. One of the towers, the cleaning gear for the towers, the toilet pods. The problem with the site was it was so small that we had to prefabricate everything except for the main square of the building off the site and bring it at night and plug it in. That allowed us to sort of keep control of, shall we say, both the quality, because it's easier to do this sort of quality off-site, and also to get it on time and within a sort of a well-organized cost framework. Next. The question that the buildings don't have facades, except if you're working in a classical city, shall we say, and this is a medieval city, they have bits of facades. You come up along narrow streets, see little bits, so therefore the building should respond to those views. You have this interesting opposite juxtaposition between the visual and the functional. But most of the streets are very much like this, and they tend to create a certain relationship between the 60 building here, 50s and 19 pre-war buildings over here, and the new building and this view, and the play of light and shadow, which is architecture, in all the pieces which relate to that specific view. The great atrium, the air which comes up to the top is then drawn out from here. There's no actual air conditioning in the atrium. It's all recirculated air from the floors which come into this space. Next. That's it. Thank you very much. I'm happy to answer them. No, sure. Okay, we go to yes.
Concerning the ordering in details and
Was it what?
Order is inherent in architecture. Why?
I think order is inherent in everything. It's the basis of all. I mean, the simplest plant has order. The simplest leaf, the spider's web has order. There seems to be, first of all, there appears to be a biological built-in order from certain. I mean, if you look at a germ, really like a molecule, it has a structure to itself. We use part of that order to give an understanding to things which we give order as against being given order to by biological development. All things, there is no such thing, can I say, as disorder. There is disordered order. In other words, we can create an order out of the disorder, i.e. ad hoc, the open-ended, and so on. But to say I am doing disorder is equivalent to saying I am not doing.
You seem to imply that maybe order was used in a way of maybe it's in control.
I think it was, well, organizationally it is, yes, because this whole problem of we conveniently give labels to everything. So we say function, art, reserve, are different. Of course, they're all part of the spectrum. There's an interrelationship. Some things have more art, some have more function. And architecture has this thing starts at science, which is something which you can prove. In other words, 2 and 2 tend to make 4. And even that, of course, has some question marks about it. But basically, 2 and 2 can be proved to make 4. And art, of course, is more impossible to prove. But there is a development in both. I mean, art developed by learning from the past doesn't get better. I'm not talking about better, I'm just talking about development. So we have the spectrum, in my opinion, which is what architecture is, and what we try to do is to give frameworks of ordering patterns and so on, so that when you go into your enjoyable visit to a wonderful medieval or wonderful Renaissance city, you read certain things which give your senses, in my opinion, pleasure. And those things tend to be things to do often with the eye, might be the taste, the hand, and so on. But in the sense you try to tabulate this, to understand this, and in understanding those things, you tend to get in some sort of hierarchical order, or what we use here. I think.
In respect to what you were saying about the Pompidou, in say attempting to have a indeterminable aesthetic, I mean, how is that possible? I mean, how can it be indeterminable?
Indeterminate in the sense that it is not finite. It's not. I mean, I made the sort of simple comparison, if you like, between Gothic, and there's no better order, but Gothic has a quality where often you look at it, and there is no, I mean, classical order, which is a different art thing, it wasn't what I was talking about. Classical order basically came from the size of the column in Greek times, the multiple of that, and that gave you an order which all things were related to. And though I'm sure that Finland and Terra would agree, Gothic has got nothing to do with classical, and in a sense, Gothic instead has come out from a situation where pieces are put together within a grandiose plan, but it is always changing. And because, let's say, Gothic took so long, people were actually developing the design as it was going up. And therefore, often one tower would be lower, one tower would be late Gothic, early Gothic, and so on. And the building still comes together as a totality. That could be said to be a more indeterminate form of order, which is not less order, more order, more indeterminate. It's not determined in the same type framework of 2 plus 2 or classical, which as I said has a roof, has a middle, and has a ground, exactly the same on that. And so what I'm saying is it's a mixture. You've got to get some order. I mean, because I wouldn't know, maybe one day you won't, but I wouldn't know how to start. And if you can use jazz as an example, the improvisation is within a framework. If you have no framework, you have no way of repeating it next time, and no way of actually really reading it. And in urban terms, the street has a framework. I mean, when you look down the street, it has a certain thing, which has a certain framework. And if everything's changing, you can go higher, lower, sideways, and so on. Then obviously you're breaking that completely apart. I haven't got to that. I wouldn't know how to handle that. I'm not saying it's possible. It's very difficult. But even in saying that it possibly is, you can certainly go way further than we are going today. There's no question about that. In the determined buildings, so the price talks about it enough. Let's say. But still there is always a framework in which you relate it back to. That's how I see it. Any other?
You mentioned you're very concerned about control over the production process of those pieces and the technological bits. aside from just kind of signing off on, I don't know, shop drawings or whatever, what sort of measures do you take in terms of,
Well,
I mean,
drawings are actually, of course, they're very important, but in a way they're not a very good necessary part, and computers are very useful in drawing as well, of course, nowadays. I mean, at one level you've got sort of models of are certainly better system of understanding what's going on, three-dimensional, because we work in a three-dimensional field, shall we say. And the problem with certain sort of buildings which I'm talking about, the more indeterminate, just to use that word, the layered building, is that you can't actually read it very well from drawings. And perspective, you can fool yourself until, depending how good an artist you are. So models is one way, but at the other end of the element, of course, is actually relationship with the people who produce. And they are extremely interested in working with you. I mean, the point I'm making about the craftsman, in the sense, is that, of course, you will find craftsmen, extremely talented craftsmen, in most industries. And they're bored out of their minds, usually, by just sort of pressing a button. Some of them have got a lot to give, and you have, hopefully, we, have a lot to give them. And it's there, it seems to me, that you need to develop. Obviously, I mean, probably the key person in the last 50 years is Prover, and probably the other one now is Renzo Piano, for instance, who really works everything practically from small scale to large scale as a piece, first of all within his own workshop, with engineers from the outside. I don't mean engineers in the sense of various type engineers so much as engineers from the production side. Whether it's a car, a sailing boat, or whether it's a big building, he works that way. I think it's one of the ways of doing things, and keeping some relationship between the component element, the piece by piece, the totality, and the manufacturing manufacturer.
In relation to what you just said, you had a slide of the detail of the concrete joint in Lloyd, and I know that the little circular recesses have to do with the way you carry it off the side and put it together. But it seems that particular joint, we can talk about it, seems to me to be too suspiciously beautiful. And also, like the way you've recessed the bottom of the collar and the joint makes all that few millimeters redundant in the rest of the concrete until unless it covers steel. I don't know. But I think maybe you can elaborate on this detail in relation to the concept that you said to prove to us actually even the detail of all.
I don't know. I intervene if you can hear me at all. I think Richard's had a very, very long day. And we really must thank him for not giving up and making the effort to get here. And perhaps you can talk to him again on the telephone. Well, thank you once again, Richard.
Thank you.